C'est pas session 3, je me trompe, c'est session 4.
Beautiful student, which is not okay. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning from Europe, because it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon for you, it's 9 a.m. for me. I just had breakfast a few minutes ago. This is session 5 today, session 5 from this financial analysis course. And we still have a few topics to go through and some exercises, on my first slide here, you see and you understand immediately what are the goals of this session, we will come back on a few tools, concepts, methods we already studied and presented through an exercise I will present in a few minutes first. Second, I promised also to extend, the ratio analysis to some kind of methodology which integrate a few of them in order to understand the origins of either a difficulty or performance, good performance you identify. And this is what we call the DuPont identity. Third, we need a discussion of the cash flows. Even if the cash flow will be very central in the course on financial policy and diagnosis in a few weeks. I will give you, it will be very short, advice on how to write a diagnosis. And there are already, for some of them, of course, in the methodology I presented during the first session, but I will add a few points in order you don't concentrate too much on calculations. If the message here is, okay, we need calculation, you need to understand what are the equilibriums, the ratios, the performance measure, the returns, and so on. But at the end, the diagnosis and recommendation are words, they are sentences. And last, we will start to present together the biotechnology case. It will be your assignment, but I will try to give you a few guidelines during this session and show you some key points of that case. That's the reason why I ask you get close to you, a copy of the biotechnology case. That biotechnology case was sent to you with other documents, a few days ago. It will be easier for you, I think, if you have a hard copy, but we can try to be in line with 7 pages of the case on your computer. That's the main goals for today. We are here, with slide number 2, and slide number 2 is a good summary of what we did in session 1, 2, 3, 4. Give you the idea of what we were able, to go through. Financial analysis, methodology of financial analysis, first, of course, the balance sheet with the different presentation, the balance sheet, and the idea that we need some kind of standardized balance sheet in order to go further. Third, the main equilibriums and a few calculations, which are also very central in the analysis. 4 income statements, margins in the income statement, and discussion about the different presentations. Mainly the 2 main presentations financial of income statement we have in the world, the US based, the European based, introduction of IFRS, and added value. 5, discussion, which are very central, and they are always forgotten about values, book market book and market values, and sometimes replacement values and the impact of inflation. 6 differences between accounting and finance, and differences of the data collected, of course. The fact that finance take into account some kind of future cash flows discounted at the present time. 7, market to book value ratio with interpretation in terms of financial analysis, also in terms of forecast. PE and the importance of the PE with question left here. We go through in the next course, like what could be the impact of the communication policy of a firm on its own PE? Is PE only a kind of result of an arithmetic operation, or is it also a variable which can be managed by a good communication policy and improved, of course? Because if you improve your PE without moving, you know, your net earnings, it means your price increases, it means the value of the company increases, and it makes much easier some processes like an equity issue. Point 8, we went through liquidity and solvency ratio. We had several presentation through the balance sheet, presentation through income statement, and more up-to-date approaches like scoring method and, of course, rating. 9, we went through returns on operations, return for shareholders, return on investment, which are the 3 main dimensions, returns. And with the idea that we cannot aggregate them, and that's the time we are dealing with diagnosis, we have to integrate them separately into final opinion, which will be given through a diagnosis. Point 10 is financial debts, went through different ratios, the more modern ones, and introduction of leverage. And leverage will be one of the main topics from for the second course I will teach. Please, second course I will teach with you. It will be very central in the financial policies which will be chosen and enforced. We introduce at that time the leverage formula, introduce graphic analysis of the leverage in order you understand very well what are the risks involved. Risk being in that case a kind of symmetric concept, not only a kind of catastrophic concept. 11 went through debt capacity, which is also one of the central topic in finance, you know, and debt capacity can be measured. That is by the proxy, as many things in finance. And debt capacity is very central, you know, in the management of the CFO, and the priority of management of the CFO. It has to be hedged through option policies with banks, and it is central because it allows, you know, a simple and quick design of a financial policy to finance an unexpected investment, for example, when new technologies coming on the market, or when an opportunity of acquisition is available. And generally you don't know that kind of opportunity or need even 6 months before it occurs. So that's drive us to the concept of flexibility, which will be also one of the central concepts we will introduce in some other courses. And last, we went through more classical, but also complex, you know, operating working capital ratios because of the difficulty, to measure and to compare, particularly those inventories which are not raw material or final products that we can call intermediate products. And the largest, the most important, the intermediate products are in the inventory and also in the total of the balance sheet. The importance, the greatest is the importance of this analysis. This is what we did up to now. Now, if I have, I present slide number 3. Slide number 3, is on the main topic for today. First, we will go back to session 4. Have a look to what we have not done. And in fact, what we have not done here is mainly exercises and concept of in the first session. There is an exercise just after what we did on the operating working capital ratios and measures. Second, we say a few words and try to interpret the DuPont identity. 4, a few words on cash flows, free cash flows, cash flow table. It will be more presentation today than development around these concepts. Even the free cash flow will be used in the exercise number 2, point number 2 here. Cash flow table show different presentations, very different presentations. I will show you one of them in order to understand how we can have a segmentation of a calculations between net earnings and charges in cash. But what we do, I'll give you quickly some advice with 2 slides, and we move to biotechnology, and I will give you a few guidelines, and we have a conclusion of the course. That's for today. So now I will move back to MEBF 18 session 4 slides before coming back here to the cash flow presentation, which starts in session 5 slides with slide number 4. Okay, so I hope I will succeed, in moving, which is always the main problem, to session 4. It means financial analysis session. So I got it on my screen. I hope you got this on your screen. You should have now on the screen MEBF 18 session 4. And what I want, is you go to the exercise, which is here. It is slide number 8, yeah. Session 4. So I hope you see the slide right now. Just say yes or no. I see the slide, or I don't see it.
Yes, I can see your slide.
Okay, you can see the slide. Great. Thank you very much. Okay. So it's slide number 8. Yeah. And remember that slide number 7 before was on the slide number 7 was on operating working capital. It was the last slide of presentation of the different kind of ratios. So what you find here, it's a slide with a content, which is, why is it? It's here, yeah. It's a content, there's something wrong with the size. I hope you see it clearly, because it's not clear even on my computer. Okay, I hope it is clear for you. So what what you should see here, it is the two first questions of the exercise. The two following questions are on the next slide, which are slide number 9. And with this exercise, we will cover a few different points, few points. Some of them you know now very well. It's a kind of preparation for the exam. It is on the equilibriums. The second one is on the level of sales, receivables, payables, the evolution and the impact on the different ratio. The third one, which is on the next slide, on slide number 9, it's about net earnings, payout ratio, PE, that kind of thing. You will find also a question 4 on the next slide, dealing with the free cash flow in the calculation of financial debt capacity, which is an issue, of course. And last will be a question without calculation, and I will try to explain that, taking into account the answer, taking into account the survey we have got on the goals of financial managers. That's really what we are doing. So let's move first to question 1. If you don't remember that, we'll come back on that. But that's really what we did before. The slide. So the Dominic company has got in its balance sheet, 1,400 euros in medium and long-term debts, 2,600 euros in total equity, and 2,800 euros in net fixed assets. Classical presentation of the long-term part of the balance sheet, what we can call also non-current assets, liabilities, and equity. The level of inventory is 1,000 euros. The level of receivable is 600 euros, and the total debt to provide the staff and tax administration (VAT) is 900 euros. Okay. The amount of cash included on the left side of the balance sheet is 600 euros, and the total amount of short-term debt is equal to 100 euros. The financial manager asks you to calculate the 3 main equilibriums of the balance sheet at the end of your classical question, and we are already through that kind of calculation, so it's not the most difficult question for you now. Here you can move to slide number 10, and you find the calculation of the net working capital, the operating working capital, and T, the cash position here. And we know that we have, for the calculation of the net working capital, we have got 2,600 first, which is the total equity. We have 1,400 here, which is 1,400, which is a medium term loan, and we have 2,800, for the fixed assets, net fixed assets. So we can make the calculations of the two element of long-term resources, 2,600 and 1,400, minus the net assets on the other side, 2,800, and the result, as you see below, is 1,200. Okay. Now you can calculate, of course, your operational operating working capital, OWC, as we say here, and the OWC is equal to 600, which is the level of receivable, plus 1,000, which is the total level of inventory, minus 900, which is the total debts to providers, staff, and tax administration. Very classical calculation of the operating working capital. So what you can say here that, of course, we have a positive net working capital, we have a positive operating working capital. That means we have excess of long-term financial resources, and the operations themselves are not financed completely by themselves, and they need to be financed partly for 700 by another resource, which can be, of course, partly the excess of net working capital, and also, if it is necessary, short-term loans coming from the bank. But if you have a look to what's happened, calculate T, and which is equal to net working capital minus the operating working capital, which is equal to 1,200 minus 700, and which is equal, in fact, to 500. That means we get cash, you know. That means also, if you consider the operating working capital 700, and you compare the operating working capital to the net working capital, the absolute value of net working capital, 700 is less than the excess of net working capital, 1,200. That really means, in simple terms, that the operating working capital, the need of financial resources of the operations is financed, is brought by the net working capital, is brought by the total equity and long and medium-term financial debt. We have an excess of long-term resources, which is more important than what we need to finance the operation. And of course, the consequence is that we have cash in the bank's accounts. So if you say in terms of risk, what does it mean? It means if these data are quite stable, there is no risk of liquidity. The only thing which can happen is that we have too much long-term financial resources, you know, because you pay for, as a firm, you pay the long financial debt, you pay also for the equity, you know, and of course, on the other side, you have cash. So there is a cost for nothing. So this is a non-optimal situation. And of course, in that kind of situation, you have better either to increase your investment level or to reduce your long-term and financial debt if it is possible according to your contracts. That's what you can say. No more. Yeah, it's a small exercise. Okay. So this was for this paragraph and this questions. Next question. Second question here, it's completely different. It deals with ratio about the operating working capital, classical ratios here. So let's read the paragraph together. The level of sales, VAT being here 10%, you know, is supposed to be 13,000 euros in year end. The financial manager asks you to calculate inventories turnover. Remember what we said about turnover yesterday. We went through turnovers of inventory, turnovers of receivables also. And the receivables to sales ratio. He forecasts that the sales level will increase by 12% in year N plus 1. Now we have two periods, N plus 1. The level of receivables by 7%, and the level of inventories will decrease by 6%. In year N and N plus 1, the total of the debts to the staff, the providers, and the fiscal authorities is stable. Now, not too complex. You know. explain the elements of your calculation, and discuss the results obtained. So it's a very easy calculation. I can give you some more complex calculation if you want. But anyway, let's go back to the slides with the calculations, which are 10 and 11. That's here. 10 and 11, yeah. And if I have a look to number 10, if I have a look to number 10, yeah. I see first, what about the questions about the cells? You have to be very careful because, of course, the cell level, which is in the paragraph we read, the cells level is a level without tax. It is what you find in most of the cases in the first line, the upper line of the income statement. Okay. Now, for a few calculations, you need to integrate the VAT. And if you have a look to point 2, yeah, to memorize the level of sales without VAT, which is in the paragraph we read, we mentioned the cell level on the first line, 13,000, and we calculated, you know, what would happen in your N for the cell level without VAT, which is 13,000 multiplied by 1.12. We have a 12% increase, which is 14,560 euros. But these two data are still data without VAT. And we have some calculations without VAT for inventories, and we will have to calculate the same numbers or the same sales for your N and N+1 with VAT included for calculation of receivables turnover, for example. On line 3 here, you find the receivables. Receivables on the balance sheet on your N, which is the data you find in the second paragraph, is VAT included, because receivable is always VAT included in the balance sheet. So what we calculate here, you know, we start from 600. It is the level of the receivables at the end of your N+1 with VAT included. But anyway, we don't need any other measuring. I mean, measure without VAT, because we always use receivables as they are in the accounting system. It means with VAT included. So we just have these calculations to go through in order to obtain the two data we need in the calculation. It means the 600 VAT included for your N and the 642 in your N+1, because we know that the growth rate of the receivables will be 7% between your N and your N+1. Now, if we have a look to inventories, we are in a specific situation here, because it is said, you know, in this paragraph of slide number 8, that the level of inventory will go down, will be reduced during that period of time, will be reduced by 6% approximately. So, and the calculation we have and the information we have are as they are for the same level without VAT, and because inventories, you know, are included into the accounts without VAT. So the data we need is the level of inventory without VAT, taking into account a 6% decrease for year N+1. So this is the last line here of this line, and we have 1,000 multiplied by 1 minus 0.6, which is, if my calculation is right, 940 euros. That's the information we need. Of course, it could be, calculation could be more complex if first we integrate, modification in the level of payables, in the level of debt to staff, in the level of the debt to the tax administration. We could have this kind of calculations also. And if we went through detailed calculation for the different categories of inventories, we could have divided the inventory level and forecast in 4 different ones, with perhaps an increase into the intermediate inventories, but a decrease into the final product, and decrease into the raw material inventories. But anyway, that could be done later if it is needed to better interpret, better understand the first result. Very often we do that, in 2 steps, kind of general review. This is what we do. And after that, when you identify a problem somewhere, you go into more details and make a segmentation of the data into 3 or 4 categories. So this is for point 1 and the beginning of point 2. Now let's move here to here. We have to calculate all the elements which are needed. The result should be here somewhere. Okay. It means what we do is to try to calculate a few ratios in your N and your N+1, and to try to give them some kind of interpretation. So I present here only a few calculations you will do by yourself when you study a course at home. The other calculations, it's not very difficult. What you find here, it's 3 elements called 2A, 2B, and 2C. 2A being calculation, presenting calculations in your N. 2B presenting calculation in your N+1, and 2C, which is classical, presenting first conclusion with a calculation of the calculation. So in your N, what's happened? We have inventories without VAT, sales without VAT. Inventories is 1,000. There is nothing new. The sale level is 13,000. And if you remember, we can calculate the ratio with 2 different ways, 2 different approaches. The first one being in percentages. What is the percentage inventory to sales? So it means we have 7.6% of the sale level without VAT for the inventories. Or it can be presented, and it is very often presented like that in many countries, in days. The inventory represents 25 days of the annual sales level without VAT. This is probably, if we made a survey all around the world, the most classical way to do that. We say 25 days, we usually represent 25 days of sales without VAT say, well, what do we do with that? You know, what do we do? It has to be compared. It's always a question of a benchmark. It has to be compared and compared to something. So what could be, the question is, what could be the comparison? Okay. What could be the comparison? And of course, you have two comparisons which are possible. Two comparisons which are possible. The first one being to other firms, similar firms, benchmarks. Benchmarks. The second one being to some kind of average. Some kind of average, which is calculated by a consulting firm or by the central bank or by a union of industrial union, and which are given to the firm, to financial managers. Okay, so you cannot say, you know, it is good or not. It doesn't seem very high. Anyway, it depends very much of the economic sector and of comparison with the averages of the other firms. If you have a look now to year N+1 for inventories of sales, you understand that we have 600. This is what we calculated. Divided by the 13,000 multiplied by 1 plus 0.1, and make the calculation in the preceding slide, which is about 6.4% or 23 days. It's not so different from the preceding one, with a small increase, seems. And we can say now that the inventory represents 23 days of the annual level of sales without VAT. Another example here is just another way to have a look to this problem. It is with VAT included, and this is receivables. And you have a calculation here for receivables in year N and in year N+1. So remember here again, and this is one of the mistakes very often done by students and financial analysts, you know, to mix data with including VAT and some data not including VAT. Year N, you get the receivables for 600. You get the sale level, okay, and of course the sale level here is the data you got in the paragraph we read at the beginning, multiplied by 1.1 for the VAT, and we make the calculation already. So 600 is with VAT. It was the number available in the balance sheet. The second one, 13,000 multiplied by 1 plus 0.1 is what we found with the calculation. It is 14,560, and you get it on the preceding slide. And we make the calculation, and we find, you know, 15 days, receivables represent 15 days of sales, annual sales, including VAT. That's what it means. 15 days. The receivables represent 15 days of annual sales, including VAT. You do the same calculation for your N+1, and for your N+1, you find the receivables divided by sales is equal to 642. Now the data is coming from the balance sheet. It is VAT included. You divide by the number already calculated for the sales level, including VAT, with an increase of 10% here, which is 14,560 multiplied by 1 plus 1, and we get something like 14 days. So it seems there is a decrease now. There is a decrease in the calculation. So we can interpret the following way this data, this result. First, the receivables now represent in N plus 1 14 days of sales including VAT. And second, if you have a look to all this data, you can say, of course, this is what I wrote here, but there is an improvement. But it is very, very marginal. Perhaps you can say it's stable with a marginal improvement because you get decrease into this ratio. And the first analysis, if you don't know exactly what is the context in terms of production process and in terms of relation with the customers, you think that the decrease of this ratio is an improvement. Well, it's very limited. Yeah. It's 1/20 or 1/15, which is equal probably to the errors, the bias in the basic information, the accounting information we use. So this is what we can find here, in this kind of exercise. Just to give you an example.
Excuse me, Professor, can I have a question?
Yeah.
Can you come back on the slide 11? Yeah, I'm not sure how about the 600 from the row 2B, inventory per sale, 600 per 13,000.
I think there was a mistake somewhere. It's possible. Let's see.
I think it's maybe 940K.
Perhaps you're right. I didn't check that out. 600. Oh, it's 1,000. Yeah, that is correct. There's a mistake somewhere. No, it's not 600. You are right. That is correct.
Yes, this is 940, I think.
Yeah. I'm sorry for that. I will send you the correct slide.
Yes, and I have a second question.
Yeah, excuse me. I hope there is no other mistake in the calculation. Generally, when you write mistake, there's another one somewhere.
And may I have another question?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. On the first row, inventory per sale in the 2A in year end.
First line.
Yes, the first line. I don't know why it is not include the VAT. Can you have please explain?
Yeah. I'm sure this is correct. Perhaps I was not clear in my explanation. But, in inventories, what we are looking for, it's homogeneity in the calculation. This is a question I already raised. That means when you divide A by B, you need to have A and B in the same unit. It means, for example, you cannot divide data in US dollar by data in euro. They have to be both in euro, both in US dollar. Okay. You cannot divide the data which is not including the same elements of reference, and in that case it is VAT. Either you choose to have inventories including VAT and sales including VAT, or inventory and sales without VAT. And what we do here is to use the data coming from the balance sheet and the income statement. And in the left side of the balance sheet, you get inventories without VAT. VAT is not included. Remember, and this is one of the problems when you use the operating working capital in a ratio, because inventories, the fourth category of inventories are without VAT in the accounts. The receivables are VAT included. This means this is the debt paid at the end by the customer, even if the company is supposed to pay back the VAT to the tax administration. Same approach for payables. The relations with the providers, the debt of the company to the providers are incorporated in the right side of the balance sheet, VAT included, and the other elements, of course, wages, premiums, and so on, of debt to that to the staff and workers are without VAT, and the debt to the tax administration are without VAT. There is no VAT on the different taxes to pay to the administration. So it's a question of homogeneity. We could have said, okay, we know a sale level in our income statement, which is with VAT included, and now, in order to have homogeneity in the calculation, we take 1,000 and we the VAT rate. It means it would be 1,100. It's a question of homogeneity only. So the basis, it's this principle of homogeneity. You use data which are in the same currency. You use data which are with VAT and without VAT to be compared. You are very careful when you use data coming from different periods of time, because the value of the currency of money is not exactly the same now and what it was 4 years ago. Just because even if we have not very high inflation rates, we have inflation. We are very careful about that. We try to eliminate all the bias, in fact. Is that correct? That's okay for you?
Yes, I got it. Thank you.
You got it? Thank you. Thank you. So this was for this question number 2. Now let's move to question 3, which is a bit different, In question 3, we say, at the end of your N+1, net earnings are equal to 480k euros, and the payout ratio is supposed to be 40%. The financial manager asks you to calculate the level of dividends and the return on equity for the shareholders of the company. The main shareholders want an 11% return on their investments belonging to this class of risk. Explain and conclude. So we have a calculation, which is an application, just an example of what we have done. But also we introduce something which is new here, and this is something you met in other courses, particularly in Olivier Gozard course, when we say, okay, when we make a calculation of NPV, for example, generally we use the WACC. But to find the WACC, we need at least 2 informations. The first one being the cost of equity, and the second one being the average cost of debt. I do that in details next time. But what is this cost of equity? The cost of equity is the minimum return which is asked by the shareholders if they decide to invest into a firm or to keep the shares they already own. It's because, this firm is supposed to produce, a return on equity, which is at least equal to this goal. And the goal of a shareholder includes, it can be segmented, include, of course, the basic risk-free rate. We will be signed Appendix 2 in the biotechnology case, risk-free rate, plus premiums, risk premiums. And you can have, for example, something like 5% risk-free rate plus 6% of premium, and the total will be 11%. And in the financial theory, we divide 6% into two main premiums. The first one being a premium for business, and the second one for financial structure. Just a few words in order you understand. I don't want to go into the calculation right now, but the 5%, if I say 11% is for part the risk-free rate, which is an outside information, which is common for everyone in the economy. 10-year bonds issued by the government are 5% risk-free rate. After that, I have a difference between the 11%, which is asked by the shareholders, and the 5%. The 6% difference are the risk premium, and it is the total, the 6% is the total of two risk premium, which are the business risk premium and the financial risk premium. And our business risk premium depends on the industry, or depends on the economic sector. And I would say, if I take an example, it is clear that the business risk premium is lower for food industry than it is, for example, for airlines. Food industry, it's a kind of stable, resilient activity just because it is a priority of the population. Okay? On the other hand, airlines, we know that right now, but we have seen that before with different crises. It's really unstable, and can be a situation of these companies can be moving just because there is an unexpected economic, political, or pandemic crisis. So that's how it works. So the 11% is what the shareholders want, minimum return they want, and it is a total of the risk-free rate, the business risk, and the financial risk premium. And these two premiums depends, of course, on the economic sector and of the financial situation of the firm. The second one, the financial risk premium, is a kind of quantitative representation, if you know, of the rating, which could be given by a bank or could be given by a rating agency. And depends of many factors. That's what we mentioned, in one of the preceding sessions. Okay, so 11%, is very central. It's coming from outside the firm. It's not calculated. It's the minimum return asked by the shareholder to stay as investors into the company or to invest in the company. This is a very important concept. And this 11% will be integrated into the weighted average cost of capital. Okay, so it is clear that the firm wants to manage, CFO wants to manage the operation in order to meet the 11%, and it tries to obtain a better data. Something like 15%, that would be good for the shareholders. Okay. So let's go through the calculations here, and you will, I'm sure, better understand what it means. So it should be, it was not 11, it's 12. No, it's 12. We have got here, this data. And the data we know is 480. And the 480 is the net earnings of the firm. Okay. So remember what we said. We said that the net earnings multiplied by the payout ratio gives you the dividend paid. So for this company, we have net earnings 480, payout ratio 40%. And this is the third line here. We make the calculation, and we find with this calculation 480 multiplied by 40% equal 192k euros. Of course, we know that the retained earnings will be equal to the difference between the net earnings, total net earnings, and the total dividends distributed, which is here 482 minus 192 k euros, and it's not written here, sorry for that. It is 288 k euros. 480 minus 192 equal to 288 k euros, which is 60% of the retained earnings. That means for a company with 480k euros net earnings, it is split according to the decision process we studied, and at the end you have 192, which is distributed in cash to the shareholders. That means also you have a cash reduction in the firm, cash reduction, and you have a cash reduction, which means also that the balance sheet will be reduced on the left side by 192, and also, of course, because of the accounting rule, on the right side. And for the retained earnings, the amount of 288 is transferred, is moving from the net earnings to the total equity, and there is an increase in total equity. And if you have an increase in total equity without any modification change into the financial debt, and particularly the long and medium-term financial debt level, that means that your debt equity ratio, long and medium-term financial debt divided by total equity, will be improved. So I want you to understand what is the situation of CFO, board, and shareholder. Of course, shareholders like cash. Of course, also they like to hear that their invested in has a debt capacity to finance its future investments and operations. So they have to make a decision in the annual meeting, which balance these two arguments: their appetence for cash and also the improvement of the financial situation, of the capacity to invest in the future of the firm they have invested in. Okay. Another element, and this will be very important in biotechnology case and in some of the courses we go through, it is that a dividend is not something which is lost for a firm. Why? Because you need first to have happy shareholders. So, shareholders will invest again or keep their shares if they are very happy, if they like the behavior of the decision maker of a firm. And if they are happy, perhaps they will be ready, to bring new cash into the firm if the CFO asks for an equity issue. you will find this dilemma in biotechnology. They have a large amount of investment to finance. And when you have a look, you say, okay, just postpone the dividends to a better period of time. And if you think to that situation, say, okay, but if we postpone the dividend, the usual dividend for 3 years, what about the behavior? It's behavior, behavioral finance. What about the behavior of a shareholder? Don't you think it is better, because we need equity issue, 1 or 2 equity issue, and large equity issue to finance the investment project? Don't you think it's better to keep the dividend and in counterpart, perhaps to increase the amount of the equity issue? So, this is what we call part of signal theory. What is the signal you deliver to the market and your stakeholder? Okay. What about the behavior of a shareholder? What about their happiness? This is also part of financial decision and even of financial analysis. This has to be taken into account. And this very simple calculation brings you to this discussion. Now, the question itself here was not only to calculate the dividend and the retained earnings, but also the return on equity. So, there is a mistake which is often done by a student, which is to say, okay, the return on equity is equal to the dividend divided by the level of total equity. In fact, remember that the net earnings, they belong to the shareholders. When the proposal issued by the CFO and accepted by the board is presented to the annual meeting, who is deciding? The shareholders. There's a proposal, but they are the decision makers. And they can say, okay, we agree on we have heard you in your explanation about the policy you propose, and let's say it is best proposal, 40% distributed, 60% in retained money, but we don't agree. We don't agree because the net earnings is ours, So we do whatever we want with that, okay? And we can decide either to distribute 100% and take 480 as dividend. Or we can decide, that's happened in some interesting cases, that your distribution level is too high. It's very often unexpected, but that's happened. We have, if you read financial books, we have a very good example of an annual meeting, which is presented and described in many details in cases, which is Microsoft. Everybody knows Microsoft 1995. Up to 1995, Microsoft never distributed any dividend. It was a growth company. In 1995, the board decided to make a proposal to the annual meeting of the shareholders with a 30% payout ratio. And there was a presentation by the board and the CFO and so on. And immediately questions were raised by shareholders in the room. And they said, why do you want to distribute dividends? You never did that, and we are not here to obtain dividends. We prefer you keep that cash, and that 100% of the net earnings will be transferred to retained earnings and to total equity. Why? Just because if you think to what's happened to the net earnings. If a net earnings is distributed, it means that every shareholder will have to reinvest the dividend, its dividend, into another share or project, whatever it is, and with a return on the investment, which will be probably will not be equal to the Microsoft return on equity at that time, because it was about 40% a year. Okay, so nearly no shareholder was able, with cash obtained from the dividend, to obtain a 40% return. So the shareholders preferred that the cash stayed in the firm at least for a few years, as long as very high returns were obtained by the management. So, it's a very complex decision. And we go through several cases like that, try to understand. And we have also a behavior course which is proposed now. And this is really modern finance. Okay. So a calculation of return equity is a calculation of the net earnings over the total equity. Total equity is what belongs to shareholders, and at the end of each year, net earnings is also owned by the shareholder, and they do whatever they want with that, with, of course, a proposal coming from the CFO and from the board of the company. So return on equity is equal to the net earnings, which is a production of potential cash, in fact, which belongs to the shareholders on their investment, which is in book value. Remember what we said yesterday. And if we make the calculation, and here it is for 80 divided by 2,600. And we find something like 18%. And of course, the conclusion is very simple here. The return on equity obtained in that company, which is about 18%, is much higher than the minimum required by the shareholders, the 11%, made coming from the total of the risk-free rate, the business risk premium, and the financial risk premium. That means they should be happy with the ROE, and the discussion between them, management of the company, will be on the allocation of the 480. Yeah, there's a question? No, I thought it was a question. Okay. Okay. So that's for question 3. It seems to be a very simple calculation at the end. You can deal with several points of interest here on this question number 3. Let's have a look, please, to question number 4. So let's come back to slide number 9. Let's read point 4. If the free cash flow of the Dominic company in your end is 900,000 euros, the financial manager asks you to calculate a proxy of the financial debt capacity of the company. Well, that's just an example again of what I said and tried to show you the short calculation yesterday on this debt capacity proxy calculation, which is very useful when you go through kind of simple and standardized financial analysis. Remember, and there's a calculation somewhere, that we have two constraints, it is here, yeah. We have two constraints, and this is what we have to understand. We have a constraint which is based on the structure, the analysis of a structure. It means the relations between the medium-term debt and the total equity. And of course, we expect that this financial debt will not be too high compared to the total equity. In general, the rule is no more than 1. But I said you find exceptions, and perhaps in your professional environment, you find exceptions like infrastructure, which is a very classical case. When you build motorways or you have a PPP on a line of train or tram or metro underground, you are in that kind of situation. And you have several projects in Vietnam on that. So here, what do we find for this measure? We find the total equity, which is first line of 0.4, which is equal to a division of 1,400 total financial debt by 2,600 to finish total equity. We know that if it has to be under 1, we have some debt capacity left here, as we say, which is the difference between the two numbers, which is 1,200. Okay. Then we have a second analysis, and the second analysis, is a bit different because the second analysis is on the what we call the repayment capacity, and repayment of the debt, is obtained, is made by the excess cash flow the firm has produced. Okay, so it is a comparison here between what we think is the total debt capacity, which is a multiplier of the cash flow, and the amount of debt already accumulated. So what we find here is that we have a cash flow which is equal to 900. If you compare the level of debt, which is 1,400 divided by 900, you understand that you need something like 1.6 or 7 years of cash flow to pay back the total long-term and medium-term financial debt, which is very low, in fact. 1,400 divided by 900, it's probably one. I don't give you here the exact number, but it's 1.6 or 1.7, it's less than 2. And we know that the limit generally accepted is 4. So we are below. We have, according to this measure, debt capacity available left, as we say very often. So do the calculation another way. The cash flow, annual yearly cash flow right now, and you understand there is an hypothesis which is quite strong hypothesis, which is that the cash flow today is a good representation, is a good proxy of the future cash flows. 900 multiplied by 4 is equal to 3,600. 3,600 is a total debt capacity which is acceptable, maximum one, according to this criteria, which is repayment criteria. But we already have accumulated 1,400, unit of debt. So the difference is 2,200. So according to this analysis, to repayment analysis, the debt capacity which is available is 2,200. But when you have a look at the firm, you have to take into account both constraints. The first one is the structure, is dealing with the structure. It means the relation between the long and medium-term financial debt and the total equity level. And the second one, with the repayment capacity, you find in fact an analysis, a short analysis of structure, and it is a typical risk analysis. And the second one is the cash, is a measure of capacity to pay back. It's more liquidity, even if it is for long term, but liquidity diminishing. But it is a cash analysis, a structural analysis. You have cash analysis, and you have constraints on each of them, and both constraints should be met. That means, you have a debt capacity which is limited to 1,200 according to the first one, structure, financial structure, and you have another constraint, 2,200 for the second one. And of course, when you have two constraints, and you want both of them are met, the tighter one is the final constraint. So the global debt capacity here is 1,200 euros, which is the conclusion we found in the first case of exercise I went through yesterday. And you will see that in biotechnology, you find exactly the same constraint. The constraint is on the structure, because the company used to finance its growth during the past years, its long-term and medium-term capacity. They ask for loans, obtain the loans, but at a point, in time, they have used the loan capacity. They didn't borrow too much, but they cannot borrow really more. And they have a new program of investment, and to finance this new program of investment, it is clear that they need to modify their financial structure, and to modify financial structure, there's only one way, which is to increase the total equity, and to increase the total equity means equity issues, which will be one of the topics of the next course. This is what I wanted to show you again here. I want you to be able to make these calculations and to argue around this calculation. When you are in that kind of situation here, with constraint number one being the tighter constraint, that means that generally you need an equity issue. It's much more complicated. Remember the second calculation I made yesterday on that capacity, when it is a problem of cash flow, because to increase your cash flow, it's not so easy. Just you have to play on different decision parameters and variables. That means in general, if you want to get cash quickly, you have to sell assets. If it is possible to sell some assets in good conditions, and after that, you have to improve the efficiency, productivity. It means you have to go into detail of the operations in order to generate new financial resources. It means, again, more cash flows, higher cash flows. Okay, 4.4. So I have a last point here. It should be somewhere here. It is here. Yeah. And the last point is that the maximization of the free cash flow of a firm is one of the main goals of CFOs. One of the main goals of CFOs. Explain and discuss. So I try to explain that, What are the goals of a CFO? You go to a company and either medium size or larger company anyway, and you raise a question to CFOs. What are your goals? What are you paid for? In fact, this is this is what is the question, and so we can discuss about that. If you have a look to some textbook, I would say a traditional textbook in finance, they say, oh, the first goal of a CFO is to deal with liquidity. Okay, we know that liquidity is important, but only if it was the main and let's say the only goal of the CFO, I'm not sure we need a CFO. Okay. So this should be more ambitious. We should have more ambition. And we have many surveys on that question. We have made surveys in finance all over the world for starting in the 70s of the last century. It means we have at least 40 years of results. And in many countries, and more countries, the same question has been raised to CFOs for years. What is your goals? What are your goals? And of course, we have studied the answers and the evolutions, the kind of answer depending on the country, depending on the industry, depending on the size of the firms, and so on. So we know many things right now. Okay, so it's a bit difficult to summarize, but anyway, if you summarize and give you some idea, okay, what are the three dimensions which dominate all the others? The first one is free cash flow. Free cash flow. Why? When you are a CFO, of course you have this problem of liquidity which is behind, but you're trying to solve it in kind of larger analysis. It means you want to get free cash flows, which mean cash flows which are belonging to the firm after having paid all the potential players who can ask, who can present and ask for the payment through an invoice, for example. It is what is left when you have paid the banks, when you have paid the shareholders, when you have financed the increase in operating working capital, when you have paid your taxes, when you have made also what I will present you in a few minutes, what we call the compulsory investment. Generally we think, and this is what we study with you, that investment is a choice, but some investments are really compulsory. You have a first category which is compulsory because of the rules, state rules, government rules, city rules, and generally that kind of investment is about security for the workers, for example, safety, security. And the second category is on the environment. And we have more and more rules, constraints, regulations on the environment, which means that each year you have some more investment which are compulsory, you have to go through in order to meet the rules. Okay. So then the free cash flow. It means you have cash flow, you are CFO, you have cash flows, and no one will ask for at least part of these cash flows. Why do CFOs like this? They like free cash flows because now they can allocate these cash flows where they want. And let's say there is discontinuity, like with the pandemic. To have free cash flows, it's good news because you can, of course, finance even your operations with a lower return on your operation because of the pandemic, sales went down, and so on. So it's a kind of insurance. It's a kind of a resilience technique, which is managed by the CFO. And on the contrary, the second one is I want to have free cash flows available because I want to be ready to go to finance, to finance any kind of investment. In many firms, CFO is supposed by the CEO and the board to be able to finance any kind of project coming in. And in the volatile world we are living in, very often you have a new technology appearing and you have to catch the new technology and you have to invest immediately if you want to stay competitive and to be in line with your competitors. Or there is an opportunity. You are in the food industry, for example, I know this very well, and you have a list of potential acquisitions, and one of the firm you want to acquire and now can be acquired because the family who owned the firm has decided to sell. And it's not in 6 months, it's now, it's in 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, no more. So if you have free cash flows to start, the design of the means of payments you will use, it's much easier. It's a kind of leverage on the possibility to finance investment or to finance acquisitions. So number one is free cash flow. Number two, of course, is return on equity, because you have shareholders, and so you have constant dialogue with representative shareholders, and have different structure of shareholder. But anyway, approximately what is the minimum return they want. The 11% we had in that exercise. Okay, and of course you try to manage your financial policy in order to meet and to have to show more than the minimum number they want. That's second element. And the third one is the debt capacity. And the debt capacity, I just said a few minutes ago on that, and we'll go in much more details later with the leverage and financial policy. But anyway, debt capacity is a very important measure. And the question behind is the following one. As we said, when you calculate a weighted average cost of capital, you understand very quickly that if you have high debt level, it means high, long, and medium-term financial debt to total equity ratio, you have a kind of low WACC, because the cost of debt is always lower than the cost of equity, which is a basic rule, which is due to risk. Okay. So one of the possibilities to increase your debt capacity up to a level which is acceptable by the financial community, by the different shareholders, stakeholders, and so on, just in order to have a lower WACC. And when you have a low WACC, you have high NPV, you create also value for the company and for the shareholders. So this is the first possibility. But when you do that, you have used your debt capacity according to the calculations we have done on point 4. That means if there is another opportunity to finance or to invest, or a new technology coming in, which is absolutely necessary for your firm, the only possibility for you will be to invest through equity issues. That means you have to ask the shareholder to bring new cash, and you are perhaps not so sure that they are willing to do that. On the contrary, this is one of the cases I will present you in M&A course. If you have debt capacity, it means if your ratio debt, long and medium-term financial debt to total equity is low, that means that your structure allows you to borrow more. And of course, if your repayment constraint is acceptable, you will be in line to obtain new debt when it is necessary. So there is ways to manage this with options. But anyway, Anyway, the consequence is that in your financial mix, you have less debt and more equity. And the cost of equity being higher than the cost of debt, your WACC will be high. And if you have a high WACC, it means that your NPV will be lower than if you have a low level of total equity. Yeah. So this is the discussion. What to do? What is the main goal? Is it to optimize, the WACC? It means to minimize the WACC. Or is it more important to keep a debt capacity, to manage this debt capacity, to be able to finance any new proposal of investment or acquisition in the future? And you understand we have two positions here. You have two positions, and the answer of CFOs will be different for one economic environment, one economic sector, one firm to the other. Let's say that today, growth firms, of course, they keep that capacity because they want to be able to catch any kind of potential good investment or good acquisition. But some others prefer, in the short run, to have low WACC and to maximize the NPV or portfolio of investment of the firm. What you find in the textbook, and what is generally taught by professors, is that firms' priority is to have low WACC in order to maximize the NPV of a portfolio of investment. This is what we call a static position. It is, I try to optimize now the situation. I don't take care about what will happen in the future or what can happen in the future. When you have a more dynamic analysis, you say, okay, I have a decision to make right now, but I'm in a world which is moving and probably a need of investment in technology or opportunities of vision will occur in the 2-3 years to come. And I need to keep that capacity. And I need to say, okay, there is a trade-off between keeping a large amount of debt capacity and the minimization of WACC. So when you have a look to the survey, the priority are there. Free cash flows, return on equity, debt capacity, and WACC. That's the three main priorities of shareholder as it is showed by surveys and long term in different countries and in different economic sectors. This is a good transition between the calculation we have with ratios and financial policy. And at the end, if you go through financial analysis, it can be just to check, the liquidity level of the firm, if you have a banker bringing only short-term loans to a company. But if you are more invested in the future of the company as a banker, or if you are an investor, or if you have anyway the CFO of the company, and you have different departments, different kind of operations, you are kind of conglomerates, you have to go through that kind of analysis, and your goals are these goals. That's just what I wanted to show you right now through this question number 5, and I want you to understand this. Okay. So I've finished with this exercise. I covered, some of the topics we went through before, gave you some more explanation, and went on other parts, part 3 on VAT in question 3 and question 4. So this is over for this topic, and I want now to move to another point, which is the Dupont analysis. What's happened here? Something wrong again. And I show you 2 slides, 13 and 14, yeah, which are on this Dupont analysis of Dupont, what we call identity. Okay. So Dupont identity is very often used, very often used, and yeah, this is what it is, and it is an analysis of identity, which analysis point 1 here will bring, you will gain as a CFO or as a banker or investor a further insight into a firm's return on equity. This is an example, but you can have another example. This is with an example, it's much more easy to understand. So if you want to understand what is the ROE and the component of the ROE, you should use some kind of tool which is called Dupont identity, which expresses a measure in terms of components of the ROE. Okay. First, you will probably raise the question, and why Dupont? Dupont. Dupont is or was, because it has been integrated into Dow Chemical. It's a company in the chemistry and pharmaceutical sector, US based, which was created, at the beginning of the 19th century. This is a very old company, but it was a big company, and it was merged with Dow Chemical about 10 years ago, something like that. And it's a very old company with, I would say, very well-known financial team for years in the 20th century. The Dupont name itself, it's a French name. At the time of the French Revolution, it was one of these aristocrats decided to survive, to leave France, and he went to the US and created the company in chemistry. It was a small company at the time, and the company grew, and became one of the company taken into account in the large indexes in the New York stock market, particularly in the Dow Jones. So this financial team said, okay, it's quite interesting to calculate the return on equity. We know how to calculate the return on equity. That's what we did a few minutes ago. But now, can we try through the relation between several ratios to explain the return on equity? That was the question raised. And they tried several formulas. And they found the formula you find on point 3 here. A formula you find on point 3. ROE being, result of the relation between 3 different ratios. And 3 different ratios we know very well, we use for other purposes. The first one being net income divided by sales. Excuse me. Second one being sales divided by total assets. And the third one being total assets divided by book value of equity. Why is it useful? Because each of these ratios has a meaning. You understand that you can make a calculation. If you say, I multiply the net income divided by sales, multiplied by sales over total sales, you can eliminate sales. Okay. Now, if you multiply sales over total assets multiplied by total assets of value, you can eliminate total assets. That means at the end, you come back to net income divided by book value of equity. Okay, so there is no problem with the calculation itself. After that, the problem is the meaning. What is it for? Is it just a game for students, or is it it brings value to the definition of the components of the ROE and give you ideas on your diagnosis and your recommendation? That's the question behind. So the first term, which is net income divided by sales, have a look to point 4. It is the firm's profit margin, which measures the overall profitability. Net income of sales, we know that. We have seen this ratio in our presentation. We don't have any problem with that. It's clear. And net income of sales is calculated in many basic financial analysis. And we know that it is, the firm's profit margin. It's a kind of summary of the overall profitability. The second term, which is sales over total assets, it's something we have met also. It's the asset turnover. We met this ratio yesterday. It is the firm's asset turnover, which measures, 0.5, which measures how efficiently the firm is utilizing its cash, there's a mistake there, to generate sales. It's assets. It's not generate, it's assets. Excuse me. It's assets here. To generate sales. And we know that we need high level of sales to total assets, because the higher level of sales to total assets, the more efficient and productive the investment in the assets is. And the third one will bring something more. But before going to the third one, we have to say something on the two first terms, because in fact, we take the two first terms, it is the net income on total assets. You eliminate the sales level. And net income on total assets is another return we have calculated, which is a return on assets, which is a very popular and used measure in terms of returns. We know that we have several returns. Okay, so we have in fact the return on assets if we combine the two first elements here. Now, in fact, we compute or calculate the return on equity by multiplying this return on assets, by another measure, which is a bit different, If I come back to the preceding slide, it's total assets of the book value of equity, which is less used in the classical analysis. It's a measure of leverage, which is called the equity multiplier, which indicates the value of assets held per monetary unit of shareholder equity. Each time you have $1 or whatever you want in shareholder equity, total equity, we compare to the assets level and try to say how many units of assets we have on the other side. We compare. And of course, what we want to have, and you understand that immediately if you come back to a formula, we want to have the higher ratio possible. If a limited investment by the shareholders in the company, it means the book value of total equity, which is limited, we have very high total assets. That means probably there will be an impact on the return on equity, because if you decrease the level of total equity with the same operational return, you get higher return on equity. This is the idea. So we come back here, and we say that the return for firm's reliance on debt financing, the higher the equity multiplier will be. Also, to summarize, we have a return on asset which is equal to the net profit margin multiplied by the asset turnover. We have the return on assets which can be written as the net income of the sales, which is the net profit margin multiplied by your sales and total. We have a return on equity which is equal to return on assets multiplied by equity multiplier. And we can say also that we have a return on equity which is equal to return on assets multiplied by total assets and book value of equity. So that means that when we want to increase, in fact, the return on equity, if we come back to the formula, we have several possibilities of improvement. And if we're able to improve each of them, okay, we will have kind of multiplication effect and an increase, substantial increase of the return on equity. So what means to have high return on equity, we need to work on the net income of sales, which means on the structure of the income statement. If you increase by 1 or 2% the level of sales, reduce all the costs, remember, cost of sales by 1 or 2%, you increase the return on equity. If you have a look to the sense of the bank, you organize, it's a management process, a better use of the total assets. Yeah. For example, you have plants and production equipment, and up to now, they are used with 2 teams working, each of them 8 or 9 hours a day, but they are closed at night and they are closed during the weekend. Okay. If now I decide and convince my workers to work, at night with a 3rd team and on Saturdays and Sundays, you can either increase the production and probably the sales, or you can reduce the level of total assets needed and obtain with the same level of sales a better ratio of sales per total assets. So this problem of turnover is also very central. And of course, if you improve the net income on sales, this operational return of the sales, and the second one, which is the turnover of assets, you have a strong effect on the return on equity. And now, perhaps you have a possibility, to improve, again, to have a leverage effect on the results of the first multiplication, the first product. If you reduce the level of equity with the same level of assets. Because if you do that, you will improve the fair ratio. And of course, you have to finance the assets. But that means, and we come back to the same question, that you will increase your debt, your long-term and your long and medium-term financial debt. So if I accept more leverage, if I accept, more debt, first, I will improve this ratio, total assets and book value of equity, which will be a multiplier of the results of the product of the 2 first ratio, which is return on assets. And I will improve the return on equity. But at the same time, if I do that, remember, I will reduce the weighted average cost of capital. And I will improve the NPV of the portfolio of investment of the firm, and at the end, the market value of a firm. So, you know, this is what you find here. It's a very good method to understand where are the possibilities of improvement of the result, or which is as important as the ROE, as we understood in question 5 of the preceding exercise, you know. And this can allow you to have some kind of checklist of a few ratios you have to follow very carefully after having done the financial analysis and transform it to a policy priority in the management of a firm. This is what I just wanted to show you here, and I think it's quite interesting, and you have to read about that. You will see there is a good short presentation with an example calculation, you know, in chapter 2, Hunberg and Demarzo, and I encourage you to read that. It's not very long, it's about 1 page. You know, you will perhaps better understand with data behind. Okay, so that's what I wanted to do with you here today. 2 things right now. I will move back to my other slides. It's presentation 130. Yeah, and we have a short break and no more than 10 minutes, and I will go on the other questions here quickly for the 2 first ones, 4 and 5, and more will be more. I'll take more time for question 6. So I move there. So I hope you see my slides. Where is it? No, it's not here. Okay, do you see my slide now, maybe 18, session 5 or not?
Yes, Professor. We see.
You see that?
Yes.
Okay, so let's have a short break, please, no more than 10 minutes, and we go through these some of these slides here. So I already went through 1, 3, 4, and I am here with this one. I will start with point 4. Just a few minutes, and no more than 10 minutes. Okay. Bon, on va y aller assez vite là. Okay, perhaps we can start again if you are ready. On my side, it's okay. So this is my proposal. I understand that 43 students are in the classroom. That's congratulations for Saturday afternoon. I will go quickly on the cash flow presentation just to give you an idea, because we have opportunities, later to go into the details and to apply these cash flow presentations and calculations. But I want you to get you know, a few ideas. You will find, and perhaps you have already met, you know, several presentations of cash flows, and I will introduce you here with a few slides on what I think is the most simple presentation first, and then with other kind of presentations in another slide, and also on the cash flow, what we can call cash flow tables, which is with a good explanation of the impact of the operation, investment decisions, and financial decision on the process to turn net earnings into increase or decrease of the cash position in the balance sheet. So that's the three main points. So you have a first slide in front of you, which is slide number 4 here in this presentation. And you have here kind of summary, I would say, standardized summary of the calculation of the free cash flow. Remember that this free cash flow is a cash flow which is available without any constraint to the CFO. He can allocate this cash flow as he wants, perhaps with agreement of the board. Yeah, but there is no one in the firm or outside the firm asking for other payments. Payments have been done. All payments have been done. So we start here with the net earnings or net income. I remember that we use the two words, earnings and incomes. It depends. You are more European American. We add to these net earnings with depreciation and amortization of a year, and we get something we can call an operational cash flow, which is very often used in many analyses, in many cases. We'll show you that in the second slide. The first thing you have to do with this amount of potential cash, which I would say potential, is to finance the increase in operating working capital, or take into account the decrease in a change of operating working capital. For example, when the operating capital was 20 is now 10, there is some new resources which are available. You can add to the operational cash flows and use for other purposes. In most of the cases, it could be if you have an increase in activity, an increase in the operation in the operating working capital. So an increase in operating working capital will be deducted from the operational cash flow. And you get what we can call operational cash flow, integrating the operating working capital or after the operating working capital. So at that level, what is left? What has not been paid? First, it is the banks. In the income statement, the net earnings is a result of all the operations included into the income statement. But what do we take in terms of relation with the banks? What do we take into account in the net income? Only the interest, not the repayment, of the loan itself. And if you never repay the loan, as a CFO, you get some difficulties in your relations with your banker. So this has to be taken into account somewhere. It is taken into account at this level. It is with the operational cash flow after calculating, taking into account the changes in operating working capital that you can pay, or you pay, and take into account the payment of the debt itself, without the interest, because the interest have already been paid in the income statement. And you obtain here what we can call a free cash flow before shareholders and investment. Two more decisions or decisions, even some of them are compulsory, have to be taken into account. The decision to distribute a dividend first. Shareholders perhaps are asking that part of the net earnings are distributed through dividends. So dividends have to be taken into account at that level. And you will obtain free cash flow, which are nearly free, not completely free, but nearly free. It means no one is really asking for some kind of payment. The shareholders have been paid, the banks have been paid, the working capital finance, and so on. Excuse me. All the providers have been paid also, the wages have been paid. So it seems there is no problem. There is one problem left. Excuse me, it's cold here. One problem left, which are the compulsory investment. I said a few words first part of the course today on compulsory investment, but in many situations you have compulsory investment today for mainly safety, security, and environment. Okay, so if they are compulsory, you have no choice. You have to take them into account. It have to be deducted from the free cash flow. And when it is done, you get the free cash flow, which is a cash flow, and the cash which is available for the CFO to finance new investment, new research, and so on. Okay. So that's a very simple presentation of what you should do when you calculate the free cash flow. You start with net earnings, you take the depreciation and amortization of the year, you calculate your operational cash flows, take into account the changes in operating working capital, plus or minus, calculate the operating cash flow after taking into account these changes. Take into account now the contract with the banks. You have paid the interest before. Now you have to take into account the repayments of the loans itself. You get a free cash flow before shareholders and investment. You take into account the decision of the annual meeting on the dividends. And you deduct the dividend from the preceding calculation, and you get a free cash flow before compulsory investment. You identify the compulsory investment, you deduct compulsory investment, and you get the free cash flow. And this is what you are interested in as a financial manager, and you want to maximize the free cash flow. If you have a large free cash flow, the question of the debt capacity is raised another way. I mean, the higher the free cash flow, the lower the debt capacity you need. Somehow there's a trade-off between the increase of the free cash flow and your decision on the debt level, and at the end on the WACC and return on the portfolio of investment of the firm. So this is the main element I want you to understand at that point. The second one here is what to do with free cash flow. Free cash flow is free. So it can be decided to increase and to make an increase in the dividends distributed. You can have an increase in the amount. You can decide to have a second dividend in the year. You can also finance share buyback and reduce the total equity. Remember the Dupont formula, not Dupont identity. If you reduce the total equity, perhaps you can manage in order to increase. You have a multiplier, return on equity. And this is one of the reasons so many firms on the market for the last 5-7 years, have developed share buyback policies. I will come back later on that point. You can have a debt payback in advance. If you have contract that allows you to pay back your debt, in advance, you can use it and reduce your debt amount. That has to be negotiated in the contract of debt or to be discussed with the bankers. It can be also used to finance new investment. And this is very useful when you are at a time technology in the economic sector, technology is moving very quickly, and you have to catch the new technologies if you want to stay competitive. You can finance acquisitions or finance part on acquisition, at least. And you can also increase your R&D investment level. So if you go into Merck and DeMarzo and also in the documents about financial analysis, I sent you the 107 slide, you will find the other presentation of cash flows, okay? And even the free cash flow, which are called free cash flow to the firm, free cash flow to shareholders, and so on. There are specific cash flows with a specific view. We'll talk about that later. At the time, we have a case on the M&A course. But let's say the framework I presented is the easiest to understand and the more the framework is shared by all the companies and bankers. How to use them? Because you have different cash flows, even in my presentation, different levels of cash flows between the income statement and the free cash flow. All the cash flows called operational something are used in investment decision analysis and calculation. That's the one you used when you goes in the calculation. And on the contrary, free cash flows, the one at the bottom, the last ones in the calculation, they are used in financial plan design and in financial decision scenarios. Okay, so we see that also next time in the diagnosis and financial policy course. That's an overview here. This is a summary of what you will find also in Merck and DeMarzo and in the document I distributed. This is the summary of a table, what we can call a cash table or a cash flow statement. Okay. Just remind, we start with the net income, and at the end we have the charges in cash and cash equivalent in the balance sheet, and we try to explain what's happened if you connect the net income to this modification in the cash position. And for that, we integrate 3 steps. First one is summarized here in point 2 and point 3. We take into account the operational or operating activities. It means we take into account depreciation, changes in account receivables, liabilities, inventories. It means we try to calculate the total cash flow from operating activities. So you understand, in fact, we will divide the analysis or segment the analysis in 3 blocks. The first one being around operations. Operations as we define them, nearly as we define them in the operating working capital, okay? And we integrate also depreciations. First block. The second one, we take into account the total cash flow coming from investing activities, capital expenditure in different categories of investment. So we have a second block, which is point 4 and 5 here. And then we have a third block, which is the flows, which are linked, connected, or due to financing activities, dividends paid, sale repurchase of stocks, dividend paid, net borrowings, that kind of thing. And there is another point, which is only for internationalized firm, which is impact of currency rate and exchange rates. So what you have to, at that level, you know, at the end of X course, to remember is that we have table statements which allow us to connect the net income, which is the bottom line of income statement, to the cash position you find in the balance sheet. Okay, and to do that, we take into account all the flows which are belonging to the 3 different categories we have identified, which are the operations, the investments, and the financial activities. Which is, if you come back to what we have said and presented, you know, for the ratios, it's very close in terms of analysis and segmentation, you know. Okay. After that, you have to go through the data. It's a bit more complex to do that, you know. It will be for next time. But this is something which is also useful, not only in financial analysis, but also when you go through diagnosis, when you go through financial policy design, and in some cases, for example, when you want to study in details the consequences of a merger. This is what I want to present you today on that. So you had 3 slides here on cash flows. At the level of S course, what you have really to understand, it is the first slide I presented, which is slide number 4, with cash flow calculations. It's much more simple than the classical cash flow statements, and I would say it is enough for many financial analysis. After that, of course, you have to understand how to use the different cash flows, investment and financial policies. You have to understand also that the position of shareholders and the position of the firm, so position of the banks is not exactly the same, and you get different cash flows according to the position of the analysts. And you will find some of them in the Berg and DiMarzo. And you have also to understand what we can do with free cash flow. In fact, we can do everything in free cash flow. Cash flow is free. And free means it can be used to any kind of purpose, which is to be a priority for the firm. Okay. And last, you find this cash flow statement. You have to know it exists to understand what we are doing there. Linking, connecting the net income to the charges in cash and cash equivalent through 3 main steps. operational analysis, investment analysis, financial analysis. That's all. Now, let's move to another topic, and I will be very short on that. It is for your homework, but it is for any kind also of financial analysis. First, it will be very short. First, it is recommended to apply methodology presented in session 1. Not very surprised. Second, you should evaluate not only the financial performance, what you are able to do right now, but also try, if it is possible, to have an analysis of financial organization performance. How is it measured? How the goals are fixed? How the teams work together? Try also to have a look to the financial position of the firm compared to its benchmark competitors. Is it small? Is it big? What about the PE? Is the PE of this company higher than the PE of the competitors? What does it mean in potential acquisition? Or is this company a target for others, for example? You should provide information about the organization past performance, present condition, forecast, feasibility, and quality. This financial organization and the firm itself, what were their successes and failures in the past? Did they learn from their success and their failures? Where are they right now in the capacity to develop forecasts quickly, adapt to what is the feasibility of their forecast? What is the quality also of the data produced? 4, you should assess the organization's earnings, power, persistence, quality, and growth. When you have forecast or real performance, real data, and for example, the ROE, ROA, or any kind of ratio, which is at the end very close to what was expected in this situation being presented year after year. But in persistence, in general, when you have persistence, it means you have quality in the work of the teams, in the forecast of the team, in the control system also. Okay. Power means mainly, are this company able to fix its prices, to keep the margins being or are they submitted to competitors who in fact manage the prices and manage the margins on the market? And what about liquidity solvency, not in terms of calculations, but in terms of volatility, in terms of resilience? Because the risk connected to liquidity and solvency is, of course, linked to the absolute numbers, but their volatility to their resilience. Another point here, point 4 is don't focus too much on the numbers. Of course, you need to be able to make the calculations, but interpretation is much more important. And you'll be aware, you should be aware of the organization, business, strategy, objective. You should understand the nature of the industry in which the organization works. You will work in biotechnology. It's completely different from the car industry. Okay, you will have to understand also that the company is always, on the market with consumers, with public organization, with state policy. That means the state of the economy as a whole have an impact on the performance of the organization. You should understand that, and you should take care of that. If a dynasty should be written now, it's more formal points, but I already said that, written in sentences, not in bullet points. You already, in fact, wrote a small paragraph. This is what I mentioned. Dynasties after each calculation, group of calculation, balance sheet, income statements, and so on. We need a summary of the main points. It is organized as a SWOT analysis in the beginning. Strength, weaknesses, followed by a representation of the risk and opportunities. The SWOT framework is a good framework at the beginning if you want to start writing dynasties. But never more than 10 lines, never. And after that, policies, we are waiting for clear recommendation. If you are a banker, or you make a presentation to a banker, or you make a presentation to investors, or you make a presentation to a CFO, recommendations could be different. When you have a general case, without being so clear about the kind of stakeholder the recommendation is directed to, you should present recommendation from CFO, investors, and bankers. That's what I'm waiting for in biotechnology. So this is what I wanted to give as advice. Now, a few points on biotechnology. So biotechnology, and perhaps you have a case in front of you, or at least you get it, on your computer. Case is not so long. It is a 7 pages case. First, there's a point I should mention. You have question page 6, nearly at the end, just before the exhibits. Here, what I need for this first homework by group of 2 is only point 1. I don't ask you to deal with point 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll use that case later. Again, you are working on a financial analysis, which should include pertinent ratios, including a SWOT analysis and perhaps a SWOT presentation of your diagnosis. That's what I'm waiting for. That's enough for this course. Now, first you have to read the case carefully. Spend time reading the case. My second element I mentioned here, short analysis of investment plan. I mean, when you read the case, you will understand that we are in biotechnology, but there is a person which is the main shareholder, Mr. Vincent, and he owns about 60% of the total equity, which means he's a dominating shareholder and makes a decision, or at least large part of the decisions, and outsiders have only 30%. Okay, you understand that we are in a growing sector. There are many competitors, but they seem to have some specific set in terms of knowledge to develop quickly their activity and to find new customers and new markets. And this is translated into, for the future, an investment plan. So remember, you are December 31st, 2000, and you have an investment plan from 2001 to 2005. So we are not dealing with the question, you know, of is it possible to finance this plan or not? How to do that year after year? We just try at that level to answer the question: what is the importance of the level of funds required to finance this plan, these investments, and these investments, are they eligible to debt financing, or some of them, you know, are in a category which can be financed only by free cash flow or by equity issues? So this is the first question. To give you a few elements, but you will go into more detail. If you have a look to the first column in 2001, you get 51. And if you go to the balance sheet, page 3, you find that the total equity, which is equal to retained earnings plus equity, is equal to 33.5. That means even the first year, the expenses, the cash needed to finance the plan is higher than the total equity level. And the first year is about 1/3 of the total of the investment needed. That means we have a firm which is in a situation of limited basis in total equity, with an investment plan which is the first year, which requires the first year higher level of cash than the total amount of equity. And if you take into account the 5 year, it is three times more. So we have difficult problem to solve. We understand that immediately. The second part here is that if you have a look to the different kind of investment, you find, you know, equipments, but you find equity participation, which is probably by some shares of another firm or competitor or customers, and they have an increase in operating working capital, which is called working capital here. That means probably construction, equipment, finance of equipment can be financed mostly by debt, but the last two lines are not eligible to debt financing. They have to be financed, you know, they have to be financed by equity or by free cash flow. And it's not so sure that the equipment for research center can be financed by that, because equipment for research center are very specific. There is no secondary market, and innovation is moving very fast in that economic sector. That means the value of this equipment after 2 years will be 0. Okay. So you should be very careful also, point 3, to identify the total equity level and the financial debts level needed to calculate the main equilibriums and the debt equity ratio. You have to be very careful about that, you know, and think about what's happened to net earnings. You have a presentation to the balance sheet at the end of the year, including after allocation of the net earnings between the dividends and the total equity, which has to be taken into account in the different calculations. For example, when calculate a return on equity, you take the net earnings of your N, but you have to divide not by the total equity after inclusion of a net earning of your N, but with using the total equity at the beginning of the year. On the contrary, if you calculate the long and medium term financial debt divided by total equity, you take the numbers at the end of your N with the inclusion of the retained earnings of a year. Okay. 4, be clear on the debt capacity and its modification over the last 3 years. That's kind of calculation I did twice for you. So you just have to apply this principle here. 5, what about the return for shareholders? Comparison with the data presented in the appendix. So you will make the calculation. You will see calculating ROE that they are very high and growing up very quickly, and that the level is not so far between 40–50% the last year in 2000. That means if you compare to Exhibit 2, Exhibit 2, you have a good measure of risk-free rate, while in 2000 you have a 10-year bond, a government bond, which is a risk-free good reference, which is 5.4. That means when you have 5.4 risk-free rate and something which is more than 40%, in the end, even if you have a higher business risk premium, a high financial risk premium, it means the return is very high. There is no problem. So you make the calculation when you find this conclusion. You should calculate a proxy of the cash flows, because you need the cash flows, of course, for making calculations of the debt capacity, but you know how to do that now. Calculate and explain the main marginal income statement, which is very classical. Some of them are presented in the income statement, but some others have to be calculated, and those are presented here in page 3. You have necessary information on page 3. Next, which is here, you should structure the partial results you obtain and write them clearly in a few sentences, underlying the relative importance of their weaknesses and strengths. That's just what I said, how to organize the diagnosis in my advice slide, and present your recommendation to the different stakeholders involved, at least the investors, the CFO, and the bankers. This is what I am waiting. I'm waiting from you. I wrote these recommendations also in a message I sent to Mrs. Trilin. She sent you this message on an individual basis. Don't try to calculate 200 different ratios. We need a limited number of ratios. I cannot tell you how many, but probably, when you have calculated something like 20 or 25 ratios, it's enough. Remember that the most important part of your paper will be recommendation and diagnosis and recommendation. You can use some appendix for calculations. If you think that it's better to have in the core something you can read, it can be read more easily. Don't write more than 4 pages in the core and 2 pages for the appendix. That's the size of what I want, and that's really enough. That's really enough. So remember also that you are perhaps last slide in front of a growing firm. It's biotechnology. Everyone knows a bit about biotechnology now after the pandemic. A growing firm, are looking for funds. They are good, probably good investment project with high potential returns, and the main problem is about the financial structure. It's not a problem for them. Okay. If you, perhaps last point, if you have a look to the debt level, you will understand that in the last few years at least, high growth rates, they invest a lot, and they use mainly the debt to finance their investment plan, which means today the ratio, classical ratio of financial structure, long and medium-term debt divided by total equity, is very high, and debt capacity in terms of structure is very limited. Okay, so I think that's enough, to introduce the case. Now you have to read, you have to work, and you have to write. This is my conclusion. We are now at the end of the course, and I want first to make a short summary of what we did. You can take slide number 2 here in this presentation, and this is good summary of the topics we have been through. If you add the last the topics we introduced today, which are after this 12th topic, the Dupont identity, cash flows, free cash flows, and cash flow table. Advice, again, after a presentation of methodology in the first session, advice on how to write the diagnosis, and also recommendation, and a few guidelines on biotechnology. And don't forget that biotechnology, you have better to think about that, and to know well the case. I will introduce progressively more elements in that case, and we will use it, for financial policy. It's a very good case for financial policy, to study the architecture of a financial policy, and it brings also good exercise, I would say more basic exercise for the valuation course. So I will use it several times with you in the months to come. So you have in front of you, I would say, a final exam. In the documents I distributed, you have some final exams from the past intakes. I used also exercises and questions we were given in the past exam, but they are good examples of what you can wait, for this exam. There is no tricky exercise of questions. If you followed what I did, you get the material and the concept, the tool, the method, the examples. So don't worry about that. Just come back on the course, have a look to the documents, particularly to the past exam, particularly in the documents also to biotechnology, and also to the longest of the presentation of financial analysis, which is 7 pages financial analysis presentation. And of course, I recommend you read very carefully. It's not so long. The chapter 2 of Burke and DiMarzo, which is very central. I use part of the concepts and some data coming from Burke and DiMarzo in my presentation. So I think everything is in line. Don't try to memorize also all these elements. For example, don't memorize the name of the ratios. Just because the name of the ratios are different from one country to the other. And what is of interest, it's not the name, it is the question behind. And the second part, the second question of interest is, what do we take into account in the calculations? And last, how to interpret. But the name itself is no use. I say, what is a quick ratio, or doesn't matter. What is the question behind? What do we do to make a calculation? What kind of data do we take into account? Do we take VAT, no VAT, why, and so on? And how to interpret the data? You have to think about that. Don't try to memorize calculations or names. There's no use. Okay. So for this final exam, try to show you understand what is the material there, why it is useful, what to do with it, how to interpret the results. That's what I'm waiting for you. Remember that this exam will be a 2-hour exam. The documents, mobile phones, computer are strictly forbidden, but and you will answer the different parts. I cannot tell you how many parts I will prepare. I didn't prepare the exam at the moment, but generally it's 5 or 6, and they are independent parts. Remember that. Read carefully what is written at the beginning of each part, because sometimes you have a choice between the questions. So just concentrate on what is needed to obtain a good grade. If you don't understand the question in one part, don't spend your time on this part. They are independent. And on the line, on the right side of the title of a part, I always give you 2 information. The first one is the number of points which is allocated to these questions or exercise. And second, the amounts in terms of minutes that I think you can allocate to the to each part. But you do whatever you want with my recommendation of time allocation. This is your problem. It's just kind of advice again. So that's what I wanted to say on the final exam, what I wanted to say on the assignment. I think I said nearly everything right now. I know that you have a few weeks before the exam, so you have time to do the preparation of the exam, final exam, and also the assignment. I want you to send to Mrs. Trilin and Mr. Tran your assignment before, final version of your assignment before the day of the exam. Anyway, you have after that to move to other courses, other priorities, and also it's a good kind of preparation for the final exam, because we revise many concept tools, methods we have met during that course. So this is what I wanted to do as advice. If I was you, I will do the things following way. I will start reading again my notes, and perhaps go back to the course because it is registered and available. And second, I will go to the Burke and DeMarzo chapter 2 and I read it. And third, perhaps at the same time, I will go further into the past exams and the presentation and financial analysis in the documents I distributed and in the biotechnology case. But it's better for you to deal with biotechnology when you have acquired sufficient knowledge about the content of the course. You will go to the points, the main points, quicker and with probably a better understanding. You know that we will work again in a few weeks on the diagnosis and financial policy course. And during that course, we go further, mainly on forecast. It means we start from the end of that course on diagnosis, recommendations, good analysis of the different ratios and tables, and we go further, taking into account future projects of investment and the financial policies which will be developed accordingly, leverage, different kind of debt, equity issues, for example. Identify the consequences on the different topics like debt capacity, ROE, cash flow, and so on. We have already met. So I finished with my presentation for today. Finished my presentation for this course. It was session 5, the last one for this financial analysis course. Now, if you have questions to write, don't hesitate. Either you can send me question directly, or you can send question to Mrs. Trilin or Miss Tram, and I will be very happy to try to find to give you elements of answer or advice. Depends on the questions. So I wish you a nice and safe weekend. Take care. Take care of you. Take care of your family and friends and colleagues. And I hope to find you again with a better sanitary situation in a few weeks from now. Good evening, and I hope to hear from you very soon. Goodbye.
Professor?
Thank you.
Professor